A woman from Michigan was traveling on vacation in Europe with a friend. One night she was in a hotel room in bed when suddenly she heard sobbing coming from the hall. For a while she listened, but it didn't stop. Getting out of bed, she walked to the door, opened it, and looked out. A short distance down the hall was a little girl wearing a white dress with her hair hanging down over her face. Concerned for the child, the woman left the room and walked toward her. As she approached, the girl raised her head and pushed the hair from her eyes. Staring up at her were two absolutely black holes where eyes should have been. Opening her mouth, the creature started giggling. Her teeth were like those of a vampire. Terrified, the woman rushed back to her room and locked the door. A few moments later, the knocking started. Welcome to Patterns of Supernatural Phenomena. The knocking grew louder and louder. A child's voice called out, "Let me in!" The woman didn't answer. The call came again. Then the girl started screaming over and over, "Let me in! I need to come inside!" The woman says that she closed her eyes and started crying. The knocking and screaming continued for an hour until it finally died away. Through it all, the woman's friend never woke up, and the next morning knew nothing about what had happened. Today there are hundreds of eyewitness accounts coming from all over the world describing a phenomenon known as the black-eyed kids. The first officially reported manifestation occurred in 1995 in Abilene, Texas. A journalist named Brian Bethel was sitting in his car when two hooded boys approached, saying they needed a ride home because they had forgotten their money to get into a theater. Instantly, Bethel felt something was very wrong. Then he saw their eyes. Overwhelmed with terror, he speeded away. But stories about such beings go back long before that. There's an ancient account that comes from India and one from a Native American tribe. The oldest known statue of a man found anywhere in the world is called Urfa Man because it was found near Urfa in modern-day Turkey. The statue is estimated to be over 10,000 years old. Whoever carved it took great care to cut deep eye holes and completely fill them with black obsidian. The thing is holding its genitals in an authoritarian pose, and people who stand in front of it report being creeped out. Of course, solid black eyes connect directly to so-called alien phenomena. All modern reports of black-eyed children are similar. In them there is usually more than one child, and they appear to be from 6 to 16 years old. They confront people, most often in their homes, but sometimes in their cars. They start by asking to be let in, giving various reasons. The targeted person is curious and concerned, but quickly that changes to fear. At first, the entities keep their eyes hidden. When they reveal them, they are totally black with no white or pupils, and coming from them is a strange hypnotic power. If their request to enter is rejected, they become more and more aggressive. Most people refuse to let them in. Those who do experience terror and worse. Here are two accounts. The first comes from a woman in Vermont, and I quote, "I made the mistake of letting the black-eyed kids inside, and now I'm worried that I might die because of it. I hope this will be a warning to everyone. I live just outside of a rural town in Vermont. It's a tight-knit community, and people don't lock their doors at night. A little over a year ago, I woke up because I heard a loud banging on my front door. At the time, my husband and I lived in a small home on a dirt road. It was the middle of a snowstorm, and the nearby hills get very slippery, so I thought that someone might have been in an accident, as happened before. I looked out the window. I could see that our motion spotlight was on, but there were no footprints in the snow and there was no car anywhere. The snow was still covering the road and no one had driven on it. Our front door was obscured from the window, but I could see that someone was standing there. I wasn't sure what to think, so I woke my husband. The banging on the door started again, and he went to answer it. When he opened the door, there were two children standing in the snow looking toward the ground. They were a boy and a girl, and they couldn't have been more than 8 years old. They were dressed strangely and had odd haircuts. They weren't dressed for winter. Thinking back on it, I know that my normal reaction to seeing children in a snowstorm would have been to rush them inside and bundle them up with some blankets and hot cocoa. That's not how this felt. The children were very unnerving. They would not make eye contact, and when my husband asked them if everything was okay, they asked if they could come in. My husband looked at me like, "What do I do?" I asked the kids where their parents were. "They'll be here soon," is all they said. It was around 2 o'clock in the morning, so the only reasonable thought in my head was that there must have been an accident or these kids got lost. As much as my instincts told me not to bring them inside, I did it anyway. I went into the kitchen to make some cocoa while my husband took them into the living room. While I was fixing the kettle, I could hear my husband talking to them. He was asking them if they were okay, where they came from, how far they walked, if their parents' car was broken down, things like that. But they always answered, "Our parents will be here soon." They spoke in a sing-songy voice. When I walked back into the living room, the kids were sitting on the couch as still as can be, but my husband was holding his head in his hands. I asked him what was wrong, and he just said that he felt very dizzy all of a sudden, but he was fine. I turned back to the children to give them their cocoa, but when they looked at me, I gasped. It took everything inside of me not to drop the mugs and run away. Their eyes were completely black. They had no whites, just giant black pupils. When they saw that I was scared, they stood up and asked if they could use the bathroom. I tried to be as composed as I could be and showed them down the hall. They went into the bathroom together, and I hurried back to my husband to ask him if he had seen their eyes. He had seen them too. We were talking about whose children they could be when my husband's nose started to bleed. He'd never had nosebleeds as long as I had known him. I just knew inside myself that this had something to do with the kids in the bathroom, and I started crying. Well, I ran to get my husband some tissues. That's when the power went out. I heard my husband yell my name from the living room, and as I started to walk back through the hallway, I stopped dead in my tracks. The two children were standing at the end of the hall. They weren't moving, and I have never been so scared in my whole life. They just stood there in the dark. After what felt like forever, the boy said, "Our parents are here." They walked to the door, opened it, and walked out, leaving it wide open. My husband jumped up to close it and almost fell over. We looked out the window and saw two men standing by a black car idling at the end of our driveway. The men looked like they were wearing black suits and were very tall, at least 6 feet. When my husband waved at them, they just stared at us, got into the car, and drove off. Our power came on about a half an hour later, but nothing was the same after that. My husband's nosebleeds became a regular occurrence, so we went to see a doctor. He didn't know what to make of it other than, dry nasal passages. But my husband was diagnosed with an aggressive skin cancer. The doctors think he will recover, but don't understand how it got so bad so quickly. He has never worked on an outdoor job and spends relatively little time in the sun. Since we let the black-eyed kids inside our home, I've also suffered from dizzy spells and nosebleeds. Suddenly, I am in the worst condition of my life, and no one can do anything about it. I know that all of this is because I let them into my home. We've told everyone we could about the strange kids, but no one else saw them, and some laugh at how scared we were. But we know what we saw. I wish my husband had never opened the door." End of quote. Now a second account. I quote, "I want to share a story about a very close friend who met up with these children and who is now dead. My friend took a road trip to see a friend near Arcata, California. They visited, said their goodbyes, and he stopped by a bar to have a drink before going to his hotel for the night. The bartender was a beautiful woman. My friend was extremely attractive. She served him and chatted and smiled. After a few more drinks, the woman told him he could stay at her place. She said to leave his car there and she would drive him back the next day, as her place was hard to find and somewhat remote. He took her up on it. He told me later that he began to be very fearful when they arrived at her home. She took him to a room and, of course, the inevitable sex experience. He said that he was actually frightened of her then as well, as she was not acting normally and sounded almost inhuman. After lying in bed for a while, the woman had fallen asleep, and he got up to get water from the kitchen. As he was walking to the sink, he saw numerous small, frightening-looking children walking to and fro about the place. It was a large 2-story house. He wondered what they were doing up at 3 a.m. if they had school the next day. He also said that they looked at him with completely black eyes, and he was terrified of them. He had a horrible feeling about them. It turns out the woman owned the bar, and she did return him the next day. She forced him out, and he had to walk to the highway. I met up with him a week or two later, and he seemed perfectly fine, but a little frazzled. About a month later, this extremely healthy, athletic individual was diagnosed with bladder cancer, and no medication or treatment would impact his condition. He believed it was directly related to that experience with the black-eyed children in Arcata. He died about 6 months after the diagnosis." End of quote. I found these accounts in an important book entitled The Chilling True Terror of the Black-Eyed Kids by G. Michael Vasey. Many more accounts are on the internet. So is all of it just urban legend and delusion? Needless to say, what I've called the swamp gas theorists think so. Their answer is, not to worry, probably it's just a condition called mydriasis, the response of pupils to darkness. If it isn't that, well, it could be black contact lenses worn by kids on drugs, or it's just an urban legend fortified by hoaxes. Their slavish dedication to a materialist philosophy is charming. Certainly urban legends exist, but given the number and the eyewitness nature of so many accounts, to classify them all that way is foolish. The accounts agree in 3 areas. First, these beings are not human. Second, they are absolutely evil. And third, they can't enter anywhere unless they are invited. One man who was busy and distracted allowed 2 of them into his home because they said they needed to use the phone in the bathroom. I quote, "So I let them in. The one who needed the toilet just walked in and straight up the stairs, so I shouted, 'It's on the right!' I told the other one the phone was down the hall. 'Thanks,' he said, and started to walk that direction. I followed him, and then suddenly I had a really awful feeling like something bad was going to happen. I became very nervous and a bit shaky. The boy stopped at the phone and paused. 'Everything okay?' I asked. He turned to look at me, and that's when I saw his eyes. Trust me, I will never get that picture out of my head. I was so scared that I couldn't even scream. As I turned to run down the hall, the other kid was standing at the end. I became very dizzy and struggled to stand up. He walked close to me and said that they had been sent to collect me. End of quote. The man escaped into a bedroom where he stood in terror against the door for an hour until he could get courage to run from the house. So they came to collect him like a stray dog. Clearly they felt a sense of ownership. Which brings us to another pattern of supernatural phenomena. Black-eyed children were living with the woman bartender. Her home had become a center for their evil. She invited the handsome stranger home for sex, I'm sure knowing that it would destroy him. Roman Catholic priest, the late Father Malachi Martin, wrote an insightful book entitled Hostage to the Devil. He writes that supernatural evil can be given control to the point that an individual doesn't want to be freed from it. Martin called this supernatural phenomenon perfect possession. During my life, I have known a few people who were exactly in this condition. The first was a very wealthy man who owned a business in Southern California. For a year, I worked for his company as marketing director. Just to be in his presence was to feel darkness and evil. 10 years after I left, his wife, who was just as evil as he was, murdered him and went to prison for it. The second person became one of the most powerful men in Hollywood. I created a television series for him, and it was an awful experience. He lost his job at the pinnacle of the industry when it was discovered that for years he had been sexually attacking and abusing women who came for meetings in his office. He was so powerful that they feared reporting him. Humanity is at the epicenter of a great supernatural war, and we have invisible enemies that work for our destruction. There is evidence that this war is moving into a final phase, and our enemies are probing for spiritual and moral weakness. I believe the black-eyed children are part of those probing attacks. But this demands a question. What supernatural evil are you inviting into your life? Most such evil does not come in physical form. It presents itself to meet our needs and desires. Often it gives pleasure, or at least relief from pain while it's enslaving us. You don't know you are enslaved until you try to break free. Then comes a war of despair. We have only one hope, but it is wonderful. The great bondage breaker, Jesus Christ, the King of Kings, died to destroy the power of evil and free us from all spiritual enslavement. He did it because he loves you more than you could ever imagine. He loves you though he knows every wretched thing you have ever thought or done. And he wants you to be free and strong and able to withstand any attack from a supernatural enemy. But you have to want his love. You have to want to be free. If you do, you need to tell him that. Talk to him. He's listening. Some concluding thoughts about the black-eyed child phenomenon. First, nations reap what they sow. Is it surprising that in America, where millions of unborn children have been sacrificed as a human right, that evil beings start appearing as children to attack us? Are such manifestations a surprise in a nation bleeding with millions of broken homes and heartbroken children? Second, and an even stranger consideration, could these creatures be one result of a dark activity that was first recorded in Genesis chapter 6 of the Old Testament and has continued over all the centuries? Today it is called hybridization, the product of sexual manipulation done during so-called alien abductions for very specific purposes. What might such hybrids have to do in the period of history in which we live? We're going to talk more about that in future episodes. One last thought. In all the black-eyed child accounts that I have read, I have not found one where a person stood face to face against this evil in the name and authority of Jesus Christ. If you know of such a confrontation, please share it in the comments. If there are none, what might that tell us about their choice of targets? As always, if you have any comments or ideas for future episodes, we'd love to know about them. Please put them in the comments section. Also, please do like, subscribe, and share our channel with your friends. That would be much appreciated.